Hey guys, it's Goosebumps Completionist, and today I'm bringing you another book review from the Slappyworld book series, and it's book number 19, Friight. Now, a lot of you might be scratching your head. Completionist, how do you keep getting these books so early? You've done this the past few times with these Slappyworld books. I know, I just get lucky because the local Books A Million and Barnes & Noble in my area don't really care about release dates. This book, they put out on the shelves of my local Books A Million 2 weeks early. And I know I'm probably one of the few people that have a copy in hand. And I'm probably the first review out here on the internet of this book. With that being said, my video reviews work best if you've read the book first and then you come and hear my thoughts. So I totally understand if you want to pause the video and come back to this at a later point after you've read it, just so you can enjoy the book and not be spoiled by some areas of my reviews that go into spoiler territory. So I totally condone that and wish you well. Hope to see you back after you read the book. But if you decide to stay, if you want to hear my thoughts about this book, I was pleasantly surprised with this. And I'm going to be upfront with you. Ever since 5th grade zombies, I have not been enjoying these final few Slappyworld books. I have not tried Slappy Beware, Haunting with the Stars, nor Slappy in Dreamland, at least at the time of making this review. But I will say, I was pleasantly surprised by how refreshing this book is. Now, with that being said, I quite enjoyed myself with this book. But I don't think that's going to be the case for everyone. If I'm being honest, I can see this book being all over the place for a lot of you out there. A lot of you dedicated viewers of mine that always leave comments and read every single book like I do, collect all the books, you name it. I can totally understand when you get to this book and you read it and you absolutely hate it, or you're mid on it, or you might enjoy it as much as me. You know, this is one of those cases. And I think I said a similar thing about Night of the Squawker, but I'm more confident on that statement with this. Because one thing you need to know up front is that this is a comedy book. Right? That's all you need to know. And if you want to cut the video off here and come back, that's fine. But this is a comedy book. And for Goosebumps, comedy most of the time for me just misses. Right? It's often just thrown into a book that's kind of tonally inconsistent, not really being smart or anything like that. But when you get a book like this, right, where it's kind of smart, kind of layered in some ways, it shows that Stein can try maybe a misattribution on his effort here, because when we all get into Goosebumps, I think for the most part, we want generally a scary story. But for this book being what it is, I see the effort Stein put into this, and it's kind of redeemed the later half of the Slappyworld series for me, I will say. So, yeah, off the bat, I definitely recommend this, not because it's the newest Goosebumps book at the time of this video, but if you are a fan of horror comedies, if you're a fan of Stein's creativity, and you want to get a glimpse of some modern takes and some good ideas he might have, this might do it for you. I guarantee it's not going to do it for everyone, but give it a try. Alright, so let's get into the plot overview without giving too much away. Now, this is the point of the video. If you made it this far, that you probably want to click off and come back at another time. But, alright, so the main character is named Kelly. And Kelly has moved from his hometown in Vermont to a new town in Massachusetts. And his parents have decided for him to attend this boarding school. And Kelly is a very eclectic mind, and you'll get that almost immediately in this story. Kelly has a really rich monologue and a lot of personality that bubbles throughout this book. And Kelly's new goal at this new school is to kind of recreate a new identity, create a new era for himself in a way. Very reminiscent to movies like The New Guy, or if you have read Series 2000 in the past, Are You Terrified Yet? Like Craig Morgenstern from that book. Kelly's very much in the same vein, right? So Kelly is upset because he had to move, but he's also curious about this new boarding school he's going to be attending and how everybody's going to be and making new friends and whatnot. So Kelly goes to this new boarding school, and off the bat, he's a new kid in his classroom, and all the kids are kind of hazing him in some ways. At least that's how Kelly's perceiving it. And he meets this guy named Gordon. And Gordon seems to be kind of cool. He's into bowling. They don't have bowling alleys where Kelly's from. So Kelly's like, hey, I can befriend Gordon and I can have a bunch of new experiences. But Gordon acts kind of weird around him. Same thing with all these other kids in his class. And they essentially tell Kelly that they have a monster in the basement of their school called Squirm. And Squirm, I think, is supposed to be the monster on this cover here, is kind of like an unofficial protector of the school. He lives in the boiler room down in the basement, and he's pretty much there to guard the school and whatnot and what have you involving that. But once a year, every year, boarding schools like the school Kelly goes to host an event called Friight Night. And it's not just the boarding school that they go to, it's pretty much every huge school in the state. And it's very weird and bizarre because all these characters are in on this, so what should be a secret, but it's not really a secret, it's just a thing in the story, that monsters live in basements of these huge schools. And Kelly doesn't really believe him at first. And when he goes home, he makes a phone call to his friend Charlene. And Charlene is one of the best characters in this whole book. Charlene is hilarious, right? So they're on FaceTime and they're making small talk. You know, it does kind of drag a little bit. It does take a while to get going after, you know, some monotony with the dialogue and stuff. But essentially, Charlene is telling Kelly about how monsters actually do live in bigger schools and that they just didn't have one because it was a smaller school, and encourages Kelly to at least make new friends and go meet the monster, because there's a stipulation that if you are the worst performing student in the class, like if you have the worst grades, right, or I think the grade level, or the school for that matter, you're going to be nominated as the date for Squirm at Friight Night. And there it's very reminiscent to Creature Teacher, and a lot of you might see that, but it is what it is. And Kelly's like, well, okay, you know, I just want to check it out. Maybe if I become good friends with Squirm, if I get picked to be his date, I'll be on his good side. So he eventually makes his way to a group of people that he's befriended, Gordon and a couple other people. I think one's name is Kwame and another is Penny May or something like that. And they take Kelly down to the basement to meet Squirm. And Squirm is a disgusting creature. He's kind of imaginative on paper. Should not work, but it kind of does here. He's like a bear mutant with mushrooms growing out of his shoulders. He has like 4 red eyes, big teeth. He has like stuff coming out of his neck. It's very, very bizarre monster. And Squirm does not like Kelly, right? And Kelly, in his kind of nonsensical banter with Charlene, reveals that he's pretty much only good at breaking ice with people, or he's only really talented at one particular thing, and that is juggling. And he juggles when he gets anxious and when he wants to kind of relieve himself of, you know, the responsibility of having to put himself out there and kind of failing, right? And he thought about juggling for the monster, but it just doesn't work. And Kelly gets spooked and skedaddles out of the basement. The kids try to follow him, and Kelly's like, you guys are insane. I'm not going to try to befriend this monster. I'm just going to focus on me. And the kids are like, it's a bad idea. You should try to befriend him, because if you get picked, you're going to be screwed. He might eat you. And they go into this whole spiel about there's like a 90% chance, because apparently in this book's universe, everybody knows about these monsters, right? So they have statistics on these things, and you have a 90% chance of surviving normally when you at an annual Friight Night throughout the whole, I guess, country, right? But you do have a 10% chance of getting killed. and that's the ironic part about this whole story. And going further from this point, you start to realize that Stein is taking a dark humor approach to the Creature Teacher formula here. It's not really trying to be like Creature Teacher, but it's trying to satirize the story. And I think it really works because Kelly has so much self-deprecation going on that it makes all these funny jokes just land, right? So at a certain point, you'll notice that there's some perspective changes in this book. There's 2 chapters throughout, but early on, there's a perspective change of Charlene trying to get through to Kelly's mom, but Kelly's out trying to go to the basement to meet the monster, and I thought that was kind of refreshing. But Kelly catches up with Charlene later and says the monster's just disgusting, and he doesn't know what to do, and Kelly's like, well, you just gotta make sure that you perform well at school. Well, his teacher has warned him that he has to do good on his quizzes because he's already transferred in the middle of the year, and if he does poorly, he's going to be pretty much automatically picked, right? And it comes down to the day where they have to pick the person for the school to be the date of Squirm. And it's been narrowed down to 2 people, or I guess maybe 3 people, in Kelly's class. And Kelly's sweating bullets the whole time while the teacher's drawing the name of who the person's going to be. And it ends up being this other girl, right? And this girl is mortified, and all the kids are like cheering and like slapping, giving each other high fives, like celebrating in front of this poor girl. And all you can do is laugh in this situation because it's funny. But the girl has an excuse. She's going on a vacation to Barbados, and she's not going to be able to make it for Fright Night because she's not going to be in town. So the teacher remembers that and says, okay, well, we have to go with the second best option. And it ends up being Kelly. And Kelly is inevitably, from this point, going to be Squirm's date. And the teacher tries to make Kelly feel better about this by offering him a suit made of meat, just in case Squirm likes to bite. Because Squirm likes to bite, and in case he wants to take a nibble, Kelly will at least be protected from a suit made of meat. And that's supposed to make him feel better. And Kelly knows that that's just absolute BS and is mortified by this. So he calls Charlene and starts to tell her, like, he's in trouble. He's pretty much got a 10% chance he's going to be screwed and killed at this Fright Night celebration. His parents know about the celebration and want him to participate, so he can't really back out of it. So Charlene gives him this idea that he needs to be more inventive and come up with an idea of how to get himself out of the situation, right? So he comes up with this idea to kind of guilt trip the girl that's going out of town on Fright Night to help him go to another school nearby that supposedly has a monster in their basement. Now, I haven't really touched on this point of the plot, but there is another monster that these kids have brought up and bragged about called Burp. And Burp is like the monster of this rival boarding school across, I guess, a few towns. And he gets the bright idea to tell the girl that they need to go abduct Burp, essentially. And the idea is Burp is going to end up being the date for Squirm. So that way Squirm won't be lonely during the date. And because he has this hypothesis that the reason why these monsters are always so ornery and angry is because they're left down in the basement by themselves. They have no companionship, right? So the girl agrees, and they head to this other boarding school to try to get Burp, which is that school's monster. And that school, all the kids are getting prepared for their Fright Night and all that. And there's a couple of close calls involving the girl and Burp down in the basement. And she ends up running away. And Kelly tries to chase after her and now realizes that he has to do this himself. Well, we had another scene change, perspective change with Charlene that kind of explains that she was fearing for Kelly's life and tried to beg her mom to take her to the next state over to help Kelly because she lives in Kelly's former hometown. And Charlene ends up at the scene to help out Kelly to get Burp out of the basement. What ends up happening is Kelly uses his juggling trick that he thought that would have worked on Squirm, but he never actually used it. But he tried it with Burp, and it ends up working, and he juggles to keep Burp's attention long enough to not like grab people and put like slime all over them, because Burp is kind of like a giant stingray mutant. Well, they end up capturing Burp, right? And it becomes like a local headline on the news about these kids becoming super upset that their monster is not going to be able to be there on their own Fright Night, right? And Kelly and Charlene realize that they have to hide this monster in Kelly's house in his basement, but the monster escapes, and they have to go try to find him, and they find him at this bowling alley that Gordon is supposed to be a part of early on in the story. Now, Gordon ends up being kind of like a jerk character. He kind of sells Kelly down the river, and Gordon gets involved around this point of the story after Kelly and Charlene are able to get Burp. Gordon comes in and wants to know what's going on, what's the plan, and Kelly's like, we're not friends, and Gordon's like, come on, man, I was just joking with you, and Kelly's like, I don't trust this guy, and looks over at Charlene, and they've already talked about the stuff Gordon did to him, and what ends up happening is Gordon has an interaction with Burp, and gets some sweet revenge, and the kids feel no remorse over this, because Gordon's a jerk, right? Well, they panic, and they feel like they have to tell somebody, and it's the night of the Fright Night, and they bring Burp to the school, and everybody else is getting ready to bring Squirm up. This is the climax of the story, and the teacher, Kelly's teacher, hears from Kelly and Charlene what they've done with the other school's mascot, and the teacher thinks it's a fun idea. It's so genius to do this. Why not have two monsters on a Fright Night? That's so much fun, right? And then we see the two monsters meet, and we see what becomes of that, and that's pretty much wraps up the climax, right? And then the ending kind of is tacked on from that. The monsters may or may not be doing some cutesy things, to say the least. The Fright Night bit, the actual event that the whole book's been building to, kind of gets glossed over a little bit. And it's one of those endings that kind of imply that there could be more than just Squirm and Burp. And that's pretty much where the story ends. So that's in a nutshell what you're going to expect out of Fright Night. Now, let's start off with the positives, because I have a lot of positives with this book. Off the get-go, I think Kelly and Charlene are a great pair of friends in this story. Kelly has one of the greatest monologues I've ever read in a Goosebumps book. His character is kind of annoying in the first 30 pages, and I'll get into that in the negatives soon. But once the story kicks on, the self-deprecation from Kelly is absolute gold. And I think Stein delivered a perfect character here for this type of book. You know, when I think back to the comedy books that Goosebumps is known for, a lot of that does not work, and the characters come off stupid and unlikable, because Stein never really put the effort into matching the character's tone with the tone of the story, right? You can have just a really annoying kid in a comedy book, that does not mix well. But when you have an intriguing kid with a good personality and a good monologue that is able to deliver self-deprecation to the situation, it adds irony to it, and it makes the jokes land. Kelly's perfect for this type of book. And Charlene is absolute gold in this book. Absolute gold. You'll see some lines where she mentions, like, Gordon later on in the book. Her advice she gives Kelly is kind of funny at some points. She's a blast. An utter blast. And all the side characters in the story feel different, too. I think Stein wanted to try something different here. And it honestly comes off kind of like how a modern Disney Channel movie would try to create like a Halloween movie for the holiday. But it's fun in the sense that Stein just made a blanket rule for this book, and the rule that you kind of have to put some disbelief at the door to understand is that everyone knows that monsters live in these huge school basements. The small schools don't have monsters because I guess Stein's trying to say is like The bigger schools have more budget and more money, thus they can afford monsters, they can afford protection, they can afford to have a Fright Night. The smaller schools that come from more rural areas or more unpopulated areas, they just don't have the funds to afford all of the fun. Now the fun, of course, is flanderized a little bit because you gotta look at it like this. It's kind of ridiculous for adults to put monsters with a 10% likelihood of killing a kid and make an annual event out of that. Like I said, there's some disbelief you got to put at the door. But it's so fun and creative. It's a fun, fresh twist on the old creature teacher, ghoul school, and why quit zombie school formula. And I love it for that. Not to mention, the teacher in this book was absolute fire. The teacher was awesome, right? The only character I don't like is Gordon. But even then, he has that moment in the story where he gets some revenge enacted on him that makes it worthwhile, right? There's really no dud characters in this book, in my opinion. That might not be for everyone that reads this book, but I enjoy every single one of these characters, right? And Stein, going to the other positives, the tone of this book, like I said, the characters match this perfectly. Without the characters, this would not work. And it probably shouldn't work on paper, but it surprisingly does. The comedy is absolutely great. It's a perfect satirical Goosebumps book, taking a familiar formula, doing something different with it, and being upfrontly just in your face with the satire. If you can't understand that about this book when you're reading it, you're probably not going to be able to connect to it like I did, but I totally got what this book was going for. I think Stein actually had a creative idea with this book. That's surprising, I know, especially when we're talking about these later Slappyworld books, but I definitely think he brought a lot to this here with the comedy. It's one of the funniest Goosebumps books I've ever read, genuinely, and I mean that. Now, the other positive is some risks in terms of trying to experiment here. I do think that they can be kind of sudden. It only happens twice to my knowledge. There might be a third one. You guys might catch on to it. But I noticed two specific times, at least, where the book changes perspectives from the main character Kelly to Charlene, who's another state away. And that caught me off guard. I'm like, wow, Stein's really trying to not only characterize the main character, but give some characterization slightly here, but it's there, to Charlene, so you can understand how she comes into the story. And I like when Stein takes risks like this. It's just refreshing. And that's the big blanket comment I can give this book. It's just refreshing. It's easy to read. The Prowse is kind of fun. You know, it's a bit better than the previous books we've gotten, in my opinion. I feel like Stein listens to some creative criticisms on the YouTube and on blogs and everyone that comments on Twitter and Facebook. I feel like he actually listens to fans and puts some effort into this, right? In my opinion, it's just a book that I will take with me and probably reread again. Now, it does have its negatives, and I've already brought up one. Let's go ahead and talk about it. The first 30 pages, right, are very monotonous, and it's just really hit the ground running, right? And that normally isn't a problem. The pace isn't the issue whatsoever. It's just that Kelly is just a strong personality, and that's really all that's coming off the page while the story is setting itself up. And it just kind of feels like a very hyperactive creature teacher clone for the first 9 chapters, right? I was questioning while reading this, am I going to actually enjoy this book? Am I going to be annoyed with Kelly? Where is this book trying to go? And it did go. It got to where it started to get good. But unfortunately, yeah, the first 30 pages were just very monotonous and kind of dull, right? Even though there is the first perspective change with Charlene in there, but besides that point, there's nothing else stand out about this. It's just monotonous, right? My second negative, of course, I think this is the biggest negative of the whole book, is the climax and the resolution, right? The whole time, this book is setting up this Fright Night event. This event that multiple big schools across the state and across the country apparently celebrate with monsters that live in their basement. Every school participates in this. This is like a homecoming dance or a prom. Every school does this type of thing. But when we finally get to it in the book, right? The whole stakes for Kelly has been building up through this whole book that he has to be the date to Squirm, the school monster, right? We of course know that that's not the case, because when Burp comes into the story and we learn Kelly's idea with Burp, that's not going to happen. But the Fright Night element itself, actually being there at Fright Night, is really skimmed over. And that leads into the ending. And this ending, I'm not going to lie, y'all, it is cornball, cheesy. It's supposed to be in a cute way, but it's kind of weird. It's not bad or anything. I think for this type of story, for it being a comedy, this ending kind of works. But in my opinion, it's just not really funny. It's just, We're going into this played safe route again. And the story ends on that typical fashion that most Goosebumps books tend to do. It's not really memorable or remarkable whatsoever. And I guess my other negative with this book, when it comes down to this story here, I think you have to understand a few things. Like I said, you have to put your disbelief at the door. But there are some things about it that I just can't really completely wrap my head around. Now, there's one thing about the story being kind of predictable and kind of played out, and that harms it in a way. But I don't know, I'm trying to figure out how to put this. It's just that the scares of the story, right? When you get to the scenes that could be scary, they're not scary, right? And I feel like if it had some scares in the book that could have livened up a lot of the scenes involving when the monsters were there. There were some tense scenes, I will give it this. There was 2 scenes involving Burp, the mutated stingray creature from the other school. Those were kind of tense, but nothing was outright scary here. It was mostly played for laughs, but the laughs were funny, and I decided not to be the biggest stickler on this, but the lack of scares is prevalent there. And that's pretty much all I have for Fright Night. If I had to give this thing a rating from a 0 to 5 star basis, I'm being honest, y'all, I came out loving this book in some ways. And it's not going to be like that for everyone, I promise you. I totally will understand if you hate the ending of this book, if you think it's a big waste of time, if you even want to say that kind of adjective for this, that's perfectly fair. But for me, I was so engrossed with this story. This is a revisitable one to me, so it's automatically getting between a 4 to a 5. But I decided not to give it an A because those problems were kind of small to medium, and they did add up. So I decided with a B, between a 4 to a 4.4, and I ended up giving this book about a 4.3 out of 5, which is a high B, pushing a B+. I think this is a very good book, exceptional for my taste. A 4.3 or higher specifically is like getting towards that love territory. And I just have a lot of admiration for this book. And like I said, if you come back to this video, if you pause the video and came back to this and you hear my thoughts, you might be like, wow, that's kind of high, completionist, especially considering that you're harsher on some other books. Trust me, this book should not work on paper, but it just clicked for me. This book just clicks. I don't know what else to tell you. But that's my thoughts on Fright Night. I know at the time of releasing this, not a lot of people have read it, but let me know your thoughts about this down in the comment section down below. And if you have, or get to the point that you've read it, do you love this or do you hate this? I'm dying to know. And I'll see you next time.